Welcome to the Election Focus 2019 video series that the Foundation is putting together as a companion piece to our strategy we're preparing for the incoming government. This session is on trade and trade architecture and trade infrastructure and the importance of those for Canada's future with a region of the world that will become predominant in terms of global GDP.
We in the West have been waiting generations for the access to Asia that we now have. We've leaped from having one trade agreement in Asia to suddenly having 7 with Asian countries with the Trans-Pacific Partnership Agreement, or the TPP-11, or the CPTPP.
So when we talk about the importance of the Asia-Pacific in terms of trade, there are a couple things that we can point to. So Professor Danny Quah, formerly the London School of Economics, for example, talked about this idea of a shifting center of economic gravity, moving away from Western Europe towards Asia. And we can see that in things like the input that the Asia-Pacific has into global growth. 2019, for example, 63% of global growth is going to come from the Asia-Pacific.
So we can broadly divide Canadian economic interests into 3 major regions: North America, Europe, and the Asia Pacific. North America is obviously our bread and butter, but in the long run, the growth margin is primarily in the Asia Pacific. North Asia is also a major hotbed of technological development, especially in the critical areas for the emerging data-driven economy of big data, artificial intelligence, and machine learning. So Japan, Korea, China, and Taiwan are all major players in research and development in this space, and they're also heavily involved in production of equipment for the digital economy. And finally, global economic stability hinges on the relationship between China and the United States. Canada's caught in the middle of the flaring trade and technology war between these 2 giants, and has no option but to engage.
I was in Washington when we were knocking on the door trying to insert ourselves into CPTPP. I think Canada has done very well with this agreement. I think we tend to forget Japan, but Japan is going to be critical, and that's another real ally. Japan has an enormous presence all throughout Asia.
Ultimately, integrating into new supply and production chains take time, and this is particularly true when you have a multilateral agreement. We should be expecting businesses to be needing a lot more help and taking a lot more time, since we don't have large US multinationals that can take their Canadian supply chains along with them abroad. In essence, we need new partners for the supply and production chain. And having similar like-minded partners could be a solution to increase certainty and reduce risks.
The issue, though, is do we have the ability to seize the opportunities that have been opened on the one hand by the agreement, and the deeper opportunities that have been opened by the rise of the global middle class, which is projected to grow by close to 2 billion people by the year 2050. So from 4 billion, roughly 3 billion roughly today, to 5 to close to 6 billion in a few decades. We need to bring intelligence and permanence into our planning and decision-making around trade infrastructure. We need to look to the model of Infrastructure Australia, which brings the private sector and their sophisticated and proprietary knowledge of supply and production chains into the room with the government. Without permanence, we lose institutional capacity. We lose the ability to collect long-term data. We lose the confidence of the private sector in Canada and abroad that we are serious, because we have better provisions for moving business people in our trade agreements than the Americans have with their agreements, and then we have with our agreement, the trade agreement with the United States. We can take advantage of these better provisions in Europe and Asia to move investors, to move business people, to move technicians in and out of Canada as a competitive advantage over the US.
On the whole, it would appear that the technological environment is likely to be a problem, but there are also likely to be solutions emerging alongside the growing range of threats to keep a relative balance and to enable trade and global economic activity to continue to deepen.
In terms of policy options, Canada has to work hard to make the most of the Trans-Pacific Partnership. The CPTPP is a great opportunity to make inroads into different countries for Canadian exports. Just in the first 6 months of the CPTPP, Malaysia, for example, has increased 22% of its imports of Canadian goods, Singapore 24%, Brunei 200%, and Australia 12%. Additionally, there are other opportunities for Canadian exports. Going into the Pacific Alliance, for example, where Mexico, Peru, and increasingly Colombia is trying to invest and even to produce more with Canadian companies across the board.
Trade is very important, but I think we also have to remember the knowledge and people that underpin the trade. And here is where I think we need to think about encouraging young people to study in Asia is important. We don't do enough of that. We have a lot of international students in Canada, but not nearly enough in Asia, because we need to know those markets.